I never expected my Saturday game at the Aurora Sports Complex in Colorado to become the stage where my stepfather shattered the last piece of loyalty I still carried for my family. The whistle had barely blown when I felt the weight of his body slam into me from behind. My shoulder hit the metal corner flagpost with a sharp crack, and a jolt of pain ripped through my chest as if something inside had given way. I gasped, stunned not just by the hit, but by the roaring sound that followed. It was not the crowd gasping. It was my own mother clapping her hands, her voice cutting across the field with a cheer that felt colder than the autumn wind. She yelled at the top of her lungs that I deserved it, that this was what family meant, her words driving deeper than the physical blow. For a second, my mind spun, struggling to decide what hurt more. The violent strike that left me breathless, or the sight of my mother standing on the sideline, her face lit with approval, as if she had just watched a winning goal. Then I heard the clear voice of the referee, Avery Dunn, who had been following the play. He pulled a small body camera from his chest and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It is all on record." The entire field froze. The parents on the bleachers fell silent. My teammates stared in shock, and I stood there clutching my ribs, my world collapsing in front of strangers, realizing the betrayal of blood and the exposure of truth had collided in one brutal instant. Word count 300. I am Jessica Malone. I am 32 years old and I live in Aurora, Colorado, a city that pretends to be quiet but hums with the constant noise of people rushing to survive. By day, I work as a compliance officer at Blue Quarry Systems in Denver, a mid-sized logistics company housed in a gleaming glass tower on Hampton Avenue. My desk faces a wall of monitors where shipments move like tiny dots across maps, and every number carries weight. My job is to watch for irregularities, to track the invoices that do not add up, to catch the phantom shipments that never existed, and to flag the patterns that point toward fraud. It is not glamorous work, but it is precise, and I take pride in being precise. Precision has always been my shield. Precision keeps me from sinking into the chaos that seems to follow my family everywhere they go. My mother, Darla Malone, never understood what I do for a living. She calls it playing detective with spreadsheets. She has spent her life chasing men who bend rules until they break, and she sees my obsession with order as a personal insult. The truth is, I built my career around rules because I had grown up in a house where rules never held. My stepfather, Rick Halpern, is her third husband, and he has a gift for turning confidence into currency. He is a contractor by trade, or at least he introduces himself that way, though most of his projects collapse before the paint dries. He can sell a dream in a parking lot, but he cannot finish a single honest job. He spends what he earns on bets, always believing the next game will bring the big payout. At work, I live in a world of clean lines, corporate policies, and secure passwords. At home, or at least at family dinners, I live in a world of forged signatures and unpaid bills. That is why I keep my apartment in Aurora separate from theirs, why I lease under my name alone, and why I never tie my credit to theirs. I learned too young that if you do not draw boundaries with people who refuse to respect limits, they will eat away at every part of your life until nothing remains. Weekends are my release. I play soccer with an amateur team called the Highline Rovers. We are not professionals, not even close. We are teachers, nurses, IT consultants, and retail workers who show up with cleats and determination. The field at Aurora Sports Complex is never perfect. The grass grows uneven, the lines fade in the sun, and sometimes the nets sag with holes. But when I lace up and hear the sound of the ball skimming across the turf, I forget the red ink in Rick's accounts and the phone calls from collection agencies that my mother pretends are friends checking in. On the field, everything is clear. There are rules, and when someone breaks them, the whistle blows. I crave that simplicity more than anything. People often ask why I never married. The truth is, after growing up with men like Rick circling around my mother, I could never trust charm. I could never trust big promises without proof. I want honesty more than romance. So I built a life that does not rely on anyone else. I keep my own accounts, pay my own rent, and choose friends who respect boundaries. To some, that looks cold. To me, it is survival. My younger brother Noah never had that chance. He is 24 and still lives with my mother. He works odd jobs and tries to stay invisible when Rick storms through the kitchen ranting about the Broncos or the latest bet he swears will change their lives. Noah watches me with quiet eyes whenever I refuse to sign one of Rick's loan applications. He never says much, but I see the conflict written on his face. He is too dependent on the roof over his head to speak out, and I cannot blame him. Silence is sometimes the only safe choice in that house. It is hard to explain to outsiders how family pressure feels when it comes not as shouting, but as pleading. My mother does not raise her voice. She slides papers across the table and sighs about how hard Rick works and how unfair life is. She calls it helping family. I call it financial coercion. Every time I slide the papers back unsigned, her eyes harden a little more. She sees defiance. I see survival. She thinks loyalty means debt. I think loyalty means protection, and protecting myself means saying no. But saying no has a cost. The cost is the constant guilt she tries to hang on me, the late-night calls where she weeps about how Rick just needs one break, the sideways glances at Thanksgiving when she tells relatives that I have forgotten where I came from. I log every call, every request, every attempt to drag me into their quicksand. Not because I want to, but because documentation is my armor. At work, if you do not write it down, it never happened. At home, if I do not keep records, I become the villain in their story. I built my life on two foundations. First, never sign what you cannot stand behind. Second, never let family ties strangle your future. These foundations are what keep me steady. But even the strongest foundations can be shaken when the people you love decide that your resistance is betrayal. That was the weight I carried onto the soccer field every Saturday. That was the shadow that followed me even as I ran free under the Colorado sky. I thought the field was the one place they could not reach me. I thought wrong. Every morning when I drive west on Interstate 225 toward Denver, I rehearse the lines I may have to use if my mother calls during lunch. I tell myself I will stay calm, that I will not raise my voice, that I will repeat the same firm refusal without explanation. Yet, the moment I hear her voice so familiar and yet so foreign, the air leaves my lungs. She knows exactly how to lace her words with guilt. She talks about the past, about how she worked 2 jobs after my father died, about how she gave up her own dreams so Noah and I could eat. I do not deny any of it. But then she twists the memory into a weapon, asking me how I can now turn my back when she needs me. Her definition of need always ends with Rick's signature. I sometimes think about what my life would look like if my father had lived. He died when I was 10. My memories of him are fragmented like faded photographs. I remember the smell of motor oil on his hands, the way he whistled when he cooked eggs, the sound of his laugh echoing down the hallway. He was not perfect, but he was steady. When he was gone, stability vanished. My mother remarried within a year, and it felt as if she needed a man in the house more than she needed her children to feel safe. Rick was not her first mistake, but he became her longest one. At work, I am known for my calm. Coworkers bring me messy files when they panic. They tell me I have a gift for seeing patterns in chaos. I smile and accept the compliment, but I know the truth. My gift comes from surviving a home where chaos was the only constant. When you grow up never knowing whether the rent will be paid or whether your mother will disappear for a weekend with a new boyfriend, you learn to read the signs. You learn to catch the irregularity before it becomes disaster. You learn to prepare for the storm before it hits. That is what makes me good at compliance, and it is what makes me tired in ways that no vacation can fix. Aurora itself is a city of contradictions. To the west, the Rockies rise in jagged beauty, a reminder that freedom and wildness are always within sight. To the east, the plains stretch flat and endless, a reminder of how easy it is to get lost. My apartment sits between those two worlds. From my balcony, I can see both directions, and I often stand there at night wondering which view defines me more. Am I the mountain unyielding and determined, or am I the plain stretched thin and exposed? The truth is, I am both depending on the day. When my coworkers ask why I never invite my family to office gatherings, I laugh it off. I say my family is complicated. Complicated is easier than toxic. Complicated does not raise questions. Complicated does not invite pity. I have spent years building a professional mask, one that hides the bruises left not on skin, but on spirit. People assume bruises are always visible. They are not. Some bruises hide behind polite smiles and firm handshakes. Some bruises sit quietly in the silence after a phone call from your mother ends with her telling you that you will regret turning against blood. I have had chances to cut ties completely. Friends have urged me to move out of state to change my number to start fresh, but I stay. Part of me clings to the hope that my mother will wake up one morning and see what she has become. Part of me still remembers the nights when she braided my hair and told me stories before bed. Hope is dangerous, but it is also stubborn. It keeps me tethered when logic says let go. That tether has a cost. It cost me relationships. Men I dated grew tired of the late-night emergencies, the unexpected requests for money, the emotional storms that followed every holiday dinner. They did not understand why I would not cut ties. I barely understood it myself. All I knew was that family, no matter how broken, is not easy to discard. And so, I carried the weight. I carried it into boardrooms, onto soccer fields, into every corner of my life. I tell myself that independence defines me. I tell myself that the walls I have built protect me. But deep down, I know that even the strongest walls can crack when the pressure never lets up. I have felt those cracks widening. Every phone call, every letter slipped under my apartment door. Every time Rick showed up in the parking lot pretending he just wanted to talk. Each event was another fissure in the armor I had crafted. And still, I stood convincing myself that if I stayed vigilant, if I kept my records, if I lived by the rules, I could hold them at bay. What I did not know, what I could not imagine, was that the field I thought was my sanctuary, the patch of grass where the whistle brought fairness, would become the very place where all those cracks would finally break wide open. The Aurora Sports Complex was supposed to be where I could forget them, where I could run and breathe and feel free. Instead, it became the stage where my stepfather's violence and my mother's betrayal would collide in front of a crowd, leaving me no choice but to confront the truth I had avoided for years. Family dinners at my mother's house in Aurora Hills were never about food. They were about control. The dining table looked ordinary enough, an oak surface scarred from years of use, surrounded by chairs that did not match. But to me, it felt like a courtroom, and every plate of roast chicken or bowl of mashed potatoes was only a prelude to the cross-examination that always came. Rick sat at the head of the table as if he had earned the right to preside. He dressed like a man who wanted the world to believe he was successful. Starched shirts, gold watch cufflinks, too flashy for a neighborhood meal. He leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly, letting silence build until it pressed against my chest. Then came the pitch. It was always a pitch, never a conversation. One week, it was an investment in a car wash. Another week, a real estate flip in Inglewood. Another week, a mobile RV office he swore would ride the wave of remote work. Each scheme carried the same request: Jessica, you just need to sign here as guarantor. My mother, Darla, never questioned him. She played the supporting role as if it were written into her script. She passed the salad, she nodded at his numbers, and when I hesitated, she turned her full attention on me. Her voice carried disappointment, more cutting than anger. She called me ungrateful, reminded me of the hours she had worked when I was a child, painted a picture where my refusal was betrayal of the woman who raised me. Noah. My younger brother sat across from me in silence. He pushed food around his plate, eyes fixed downward. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to change the subject. I do not blame him. He was trapped. Living under their roof meant he had to keep peace at any cost. His silence was survival, just as my resistance was mine. The conflict did not erupt in shouts. It bled out in sighs and slammed cabinet doors in the way my mother withheld warmth after dinner ended. When I refused to sign, she would stack plates with a tight jaw, washing dishes as if she scrubbed away her disappointment in me. Rick would leave the room muttering about wasted potential, about how loyalty had become extinct in our generation. The evening always ended with a phone call the next morning. My mother's voice, softer now, guilt woven into every word. She would say, "Jessica, you are the only one I can rely on. You know Rick is trying. If you loved me, you would help us. I learned to document everything, every dinner, every proposal, every voicemail. I wrote them down in a notebook I kept hidden in my apartment, a notebook that grew thicker with each passing month. It was my way of reminding myself that I was not crazy, that this was a pattern, not an isolated plea. Still, guilt clung to me. Walking out of their house after those dinners, I carried it like an invisible backpack. I told myself I was strong for saying no, but in the quiet of my apartment, the silence turned heavy. I wondered if I was cold, if independence had made me cruel, if maybe signing once would buy me peace. But then I remembered the calls from creditors when I was 19 asking about accounts I had never opened. I remembered the sleepless nights after discovering Rick had tried to use my social security number for a payday loan. Those memories anchored me. Signing would never bring peace. It would only feed the fire. Yet Darla believed with all her heart that siding with Rick was loyalty. She mistook obedience for love, and that belief turned me into the enemy in my own family. Every boundary I drew became another reason she claimed I had turned against her. Every no I uttered was twisted into proof that I cared more for money than for blood. The irony was that money was never the point. It was about survival. It was about refusing to drown with them in debts they had chosen. But try telling that to a mother who measures love by sacrifice, and a stepfather who measures worth by how much credit he can squeeze out of others. That was the conflict simmering under every meal, every phone call, every unexpected knock at my door. It was not loud, but it was relentless, and it built pressure like a storm waiting for the first crack of thunder. There was one evening that stays with me more than the others. It was late autumn, the kind of Colorado night when the wind whips through bare branches and rattles windows in their frames. I had agreed to stop by my mother's house after work, hoping for nothing more than a quick dinner and an early exit. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, I knew better. Rick was already there, a folder spread open on the table number scrawled in red ink across half a dozen pages. My mother hovered behind him, eyes bright with expectation, as if this time I would finally give in. Rick launched into his speech before I had even set down my bag. He painted pictures of profits of a booming market for mobile office vans of clients already lined up to pay top dollar. He spoke like a man selling a vision, his voice rising and falling in rhythms rehearsed 100 times. Then he slid the papers across the table. "Jessica, you just need to co-sign," he said. "You will not even notice it. 6 months from now, you will thank me." I looked down at the contract at the fine print outlining a loan for $500,000. The amount was staggering. Even if the project failed, he assured me insurance would cover it. But I had read enough contracts to know insurance never covered fraud. I pushed the papers back toward him. "Not this time, Rick. Not any time." My mother's face hardened. She accused me of selfishness, of forgetting everything she had done for me. She said loyalty meant sacrifice. She said blood was thicker than ink on a contract. Her words felt rehearsed, too, like a chorus she had memorized. I wanted to tell her that loyalty does not mean walking willingly into quicksand, but I knew it would not matter. To her, Rick's dreams were more real than my caution. Noah sat silently at the far end of the table. He stirred his soup without eating, his shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. I caught his eye once just long enough to see the apology he could not speak. He was trapped by dependence, and he knew it. I wanted to reach for him to tell him it was not his fault, but in that room, any word of comfort would have sounded like treason. The evening ended like so many others. Rick stormed out to smoke on the porch. My mother gathered dishes with a sharp clatter, her silence colder than any words. I left with a knot in my stomach, my phone already buzzing with messages she would send before I reached my apartment. By the time I climbed into bed, I had 4 voicemails waiting, each one layered with guilt, each one reminding me that I was their only hope, each one ending with the same refrain: "If you really loved me, you would help us." Those nights took their toll. At work, I carried myself with confidence, but inside I was fraying. Every new scheme Rick pitched became another test of endurance. Every accusation my mother hurled chipped away at the fragile hope that she might one day see me for who I was, not just for what I refused to give. The conflict shaped everything. It shaped how I managed my money, how I chose friends, how I trusted people. It shaped the way I played soccer, running with a ferocity that startled teammates as if outrunning invisible chains. It shaped the way I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep holding the line before it broke. The truth is, I lived in constant contradiction. I wanted peace, but would not buy it with signatures. I wanted love, but would not trade it for debt. I wanted family, but could not accept their definition of loyalty. That contradiction became the rhythm of my life, pulsing through every interaction until it built a tension that had no release. Looking back, it feels inevitable that the pressure would burst somewhere. Pressure always finds a crack. I just never expected it to happen on a soccer field under the wide Colorado sky in front of strangers and teammates and children with juice boxes on the sidelines. But that is where the years of manipulation, guilt, and coercion finally collided with my refusal. And that is where the world saw what had been hidden in private for so long. Saturday mornings were my refuge. The Aurora Sports Complex stretched wide against the foothills, its fields divided by white chalk lines and the low hum of families carrying folding chairs. The smell of damp grass clung to the air, mixed with sunscreen and the faint sweetness of concession stand hot chocolate. This was where I could breathe. No contracts, no phone calls from my mother, no schemes pitched across a dinner table. Just the simple clarity of a game. 2 goals, 1 ball rules everyone agreed to. That morning, the sky was crisp blue, the kind of clarity you only get in Colorado after the first frost. My teammates, the Highline Rovers, stretched along the sidelines laughing about the week's struggles. Nurses griped about double shifts, teachers swapped stories about restless classrooms, and I laced up my cleats, letting their chatter wash over me. For a moment, I almost believed the weight of my family could not reach me here. The whistle blew and the game began. I felt the ground steady beneath my shoes as I sprinted across midfield. The ball skimmed against my instep, a clean pass to Marcy on the wing. This was the rhythm I loved, movement breath, the pulse of adrenaline. Here, every decision was instant and unclouded. If someone fouled you, the whistle cut in. If you scored, the net rippled and the crowd cheered. Order in motion. But as I turned to reposition, a shadow caught my eye. Beyond the fence near the bleachers, I saw them. Rick, in his pressed shirt and heavy watch, standing tall as if he owned the place. Darla at his side, lips curled into something between a smile and a smirk. And Noah, trailing behind his hands, shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his eyes lowered. My chest tightened. They had never come before. Not once had they cared to watch me play. Their presence now was not about support, it was about leverage. I tried to push the side away to focus on the ball, on the crisp shouts of teammates calling plays. But I felt Rick's gaze like a weight pressing between my shoulder blades. At halftime, while we gathered near the bench sipping water, he made his move. He stepped to the edge of the fence folder in hand, its edges bent from being carried too often. He lifted it slightly as if showing off a prize. His voice carried over the field. "Jessica, it is time. We just need your signature." Everyone turned eyes flicking between us. My heart pounded with the heat of humiliation. I shook my head, a sharp motion hoping to end it without words, but Darla clapped her hands, once sharply drawing attention. She called out loud enough for strangers to hear that family stands together, that I was ungrateful for everything she had sacrificed. Her voice rang out, cutting through the chatter of children and parents. My teammates shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others watching with pity. I felt cornered. The folder was not just paper. It was a trap laid in public meant to shame me into submission. If I refused, I was the daughter who abandoned her family. If I signed, I was ruined. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "Not here, not ever," I said. Rick's jaw twitched, his grip on the folder tightening. The second half began, but I could not shake the dread. Every run down the field felt heavier, every breath shorter. I glanced toward the fence more than I should, catching glimpses of Darla whispering in Rick's ear, of Noah standing stiff as a post, refusing to look at me. The game blurred into background noise, my mind consumed by their presence. Then it happened. Near the 70-minute mark, as I cut toward the sideline for a throw-in, Rick moved. He shoved open the gate meant for staff and strode onto the grass. For a moment, the world slowed. Parents gasped. My teammates froze. The referee, Avery Dunn, raised his whistle, but before he could blow it, Rick charged. His shoulder slammed into mine with brutal force, driving me into the corner flag. Pain erupted across my ribs, sharp and hot, stealing my breath. I crumpled, clutching my side, the field spinning around me. And then the sound that will never leave me. My mother standing at the fence, clapping, her voice cutting across the stunned silence. That is what she deserves. That is family. The betrayal stung sharper than the impact her words slicing through me like glass. I lay on the ground staring at the sky, realizing in that moment that blood had never protected me. Blood had turned against me. The world around me seemed to tilt as I tried to pull air back into my lungs. The sharp pain across my ribs stole every breath, but worse than the pain was the noise that followed. Not the crowd gasping, not my teammates shouting, but my own mother's hands striking together in rhythm, her cheer echoing like thunder over the stunned silence. "That is my girl," she shouted, her tone laced with a pride so twisted it made my stomach heave. She had not come to support me. She had come to watch me break. I pushed against the turf, struggling to rise, but my body refused. The game had stopped the ball lying forgotten near the sideline. Players from both teams gathered eyes wide with shock, murmurs rippling through them. A few parents stood unsure whether to intervene. The weight of humiliation pressed heavier than Rick's hit. I could feel eyes on me, strangers trying to make sense of a family imploding in front of them. Then came the sound that cut through everything, a whistle sharp and commanding. Avery Dunn, the referee, strode forward with authority. His hand reached to his chest, where a small body camera was clipped. He pressed a button, the light flashing red. His voice was steady, deliberate. "It is all on record," he declared. Every word, every movement captured in clear detail. The crowd shifted, whispers rising. Phones appeared, parents and teens lifting them high to record. I saw the glint of screens aimed at me, at Rick, at Darla still clapping. The humiliation deepened, but along with it came a spark of something else, hope, proof. For years, every fight, every manipulation had happened behind closed doors, leaving me to defend myself with only memory as evidence. But now, in this moment, their cruelty was public, undeniable, preserved in pixels and sound. Rick turned toward Avery, his face red with fury. "You do not know what you are talking about," he barked. "This is family business." But his words only made the crowd lean closer, their judgment heavy in the silence that followed. Darla hissed something I could not hear, her smirk faltering as she noticed the phones, the eyes, the undeniable reality that this was no longer private. My teammates rushed to my side, helping me sit upright. Marcy knelt next to me, her hand firm on my shoulder. "Jess, stay down," she whispered. "We called 911. The words blurred in my ears, but their presence steadied me. For once, I was not alone facing them. For once, others saw what I had endured. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Rick backed away, his bravado slipping as parents began to shout. One man from the opposing team's bench yelled that he should be arrested. Another mother pulled her child closer, shielding them from the sight. The community itself turned against him, their outrage spreading like fire through dry grass. I winced as medics arrived, lifting me onto a stretcher. Every bump sent pain shooting through my side, but I clenched my jaw, refusing to let tears fall. I had given them enough satisfaction already. As they rolled me toward the ambulance, I caught Noah's eyes at last. He stood near the fence, his face pale, lips pressed tight. For a flicker of a moment, guilt flashed across his features. He did not cheer, he did not clap, but he did not move either. His silence was its own wound. Inside the ambulance, I stared at the ceiling, the flashing lights casting red and blue shadows across my vision. My phone buzzed in my bag, messages already pouring in from teammates and strangers alike. Videos were spreading. The truth was out there now, and it could not be taken back. My mother's voice cheering my stepfather's hit the referee's declaration, all sealed into evidence. As the ambulance pulled away, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, this was not just an injury. This was the crack that would split everything open. They had tried to trap me with guilt, with shame, with contracts and manipulation. But by stepping onto that field, by striking me in public, they had given me something stronger than all their schemes combined. Witnesses, proof, a story that would no longer stay inside the four walls of their house. For the first time in years, even through the ache of broken ribs, I felt the edge of freedom. They had meant to humiliate me, to force me into submission. Instead, they had handed me the beginning of their downfall. The sterile white ceiling of Aurora Medical Center blurred above me as nurses adjusted IV lines and checked monitors. The pain in my ribs pulsed with every breath, but beneath the ache was something sharper, something that kept me awake through the haze of medication, the sound of my mother clapping, cheering as I fell. That sound looped in my head, refusing to fade. A police officer appeared by my bedside the next morning, his uniform pressed, his notebook ready. He introduced himself as Officer Klein from the Aurora Police Department. His questions came steady. "Did Rick push you intentionally? Did your mother say anything? Was this the first time you had been pressured about financial documents?" Each answer I gave was clipped factual. Years of compliance work had taught me how to build a case, and I laid out the timeline like evidence on a desk. I told him about the dinner table pitches, the forged applications, the late-night calls. He wrote quickly, his pen scratching against the paper. Then he mentioned the body cam. The referee, Avery Dunn, had already provided footage. Parents had turned in cell phone recordings too. Klein said, "You should know, Ms. Malone, this is strong, very strong." The words hit me harder than I expected. For years I had fought battles in shadows, accused of exaggeration, told I was cold or ungrateful. Now, at last, proof existed beyond my voice. Proof that my stepfather's violence and my mother's betrayal were not stories I had made up to punish them. Proof that truth lived outside my own memory. By afternoon, Avery himself visited. He was younger than I remembered, maybe early 40s, his face weathered from years on the field. He stood awkwardly at the door until I waved him in. He set his cap against the chair and spoke with quiet conviction. "I have been a ref a long time, Jessica. I have seen parents yell at kids. I have broken up fights. But I have never seen what I saw yesterday. What he did, what she cheered at, is wrong. People need to see this." He handed me a flash drive with a copy of the footage. His voice dropped lower. "This is not just your shield. It is your sword." Holding that small device in my hand, I felt the balance shift. For once, I was not on the defensive. For once, I carried something undeniable. But evidence does not silence manipulators. That evening, as the sky outside my hospital window darkened, my phone lit up with a call from my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came sharp, then soft, twisting between anger and pleading. She said the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, that Rick was just emotional, that I had embarrassed them by refusing to sign. She told me to delete the footage, to tell police it was a misunderstanding. She said, "If you loved me, you would not let strangers destroy us." I stared at the flash drive in my hand while she spoke. Every word deepened the gulf between us. She was not calling to ask how I felt. She was not calling to apologize. She was calling to protect him, to preserve her illusion, to keep the truth buried. I let her words hang in the air, then ended the call without responding. The silence that followed felt cleaner than any argument. When visiting hours ended, Marcy and 2 other teammates slipped in with flowers. They told me half the league was buzzing, that parents had posted videos online, that support was flooding social media. Strangers were calling me brave, furious on my behalf. It felt surreal, like my private nightmare had spilled into the public square and now everyone had an opinion. But beneath the noise, I sensed something powerful. The tide was turning. This was no longer just my burden. The community had seen, and they would not forget. 2 days later, I returned to my apartment at Highline Village with my arm in a sling and bandages tied around my ribs. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant from the hospital clinging to my clothes, a reminder of how close I had come to breaking completely. I wanted quiet time to heal, but Rick and Darla had other plans. An envelope waited at my door. Inside, I found a stack of loan documents with my name forged across the signature lines. My stomach turned as I flipped through the pages. The dates were recent, the numbers precise. Rick had grown bolder. He was not just pressuring me anymore. He was trying to erase my refusal to create a paper trail that would bind me whether I agreed or not. I called Officer Klein immediately. He met me in the lobby, took photographs, and collected the papers. His brow furrowed as he read. He said this was not only fraud, it was escalation. He promised the department would open a deeper investigation, one that reached beyond the assault to include financial crimes. His calm voice steadied me, but beneath it I heard the warning. People like Rick rarely stop when cornered. They lash out harder. That warning proved true. The very next morning, my supervisor at Blue Quarry Systems called me into her office. She closed the door gently, her face drawn with concern. She told me someone had called the corporate hotline accusing me of misconduct of funneling money through fake compliance checks. She knew me well enough to doubt it, but protocol required an internal review. My hands went cold. It was Darla. It had her fingerprints all over it, her way of twisting the knife. She wanted me discredited before the truth reached court. Walking out of the office that day, I felt the walls pressing in. They were not just attacking my body anymore. They were coming for my livelihood, for the one place I felt secure. But what they did not understand was that every strike left a mark, and every mark became evidence. I documented the forged contracts, the phone calls, the false report. My notebook swelled with details, each entry a thread weaving into a net I would cast back at them. That night, I heard scratching at my apartment door. My chest tightened. I peered through the peephole and saw Rick hunched over, fiddling with the lock. My pulse thundered. I called the police, my voice sharp, steady, despite the fear crawling up my spine. By the time officers arrived, Rick was gone, but the marks on the lock told the story. Officer Klein filed another report. He told me this pattern was textbook intimidation. They wanted me silent. They wanted me scared. Instead, I grew resolved. Marcy and my teammates rallied around me, refusing to let me isolate. They organized carpools to work, stood with me at practices, and filled my apartment with laughter to drown out the darkness Rick and Darla tried to spread. Avery checked in often, reminding me that the footage was secure, backed up in multiple places. His calm presence became a quiet anchor. Still, the fear lingered. Every shadow in the parking lot made my breath hitch. Every unknown number on my phone felt like another trap. Yet beneath that fear lived something else fire. For years, my family had spun lies behind closed doors, and I had been forced to carry the burden alone. Now their lies were unraveling in public, and I would not let the unraveling stop. The escalation was brutal, but it also revealed their desperation. They were losing control, and the harder they pushed, the clearer the truth became. Each forged paper, each false accusation, each attempt to break into my home, these were no longer just threats. They were confessions written in their own hands, and I would use every one of them. The day I walked into the law office of Jennifer Reeves, the Denver sky was heavy with late afternoon storm clouds. The glass lobby smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet, sterile yet solid, like a place where truth might finally be given weight. Jennifer met me in a navy suit, her handshake firm, her eyes sharp with the kind of focus that comes from years of staring down liars. She ushered me into her office lined with shelves of thick casebooks and framed certificates. I laid everything before her, the forged contracts, the body cam footage, the cell phone videos, the false report to my company, even the photographs of my damaged lock. She listened without interrupting her pen, moving quickly across yellow legal paper. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and let out a low breath. "Jessica," she said, "what you have here is not just assault. This is fraud, intimidation, conspiracy. This is a pattern a jury will understand." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time, someone with authority said the words I had been waiting years to hear. She told me we would file for protective orders, begin criminal charges, and prepare for civil claims if necessary. She warned it would not be quick. People like Rick and Darla fight hard when cornered. They would twist narratives, stall proceedings, and try to exhaust me. But with evidence this strong, she said the fight was worth it. Leaving her office that day, the storm finally broke. Rain streaked across my windshield as I drove home. But instead of gloom, I felt clarity. Every drop reminded me that the tide had turned. For once, I was not just defending myself. I was moving forward. But progress brought new tension. Rick and Darla received notice of the protective order within a week. Their response was immediate. I began receiving emails from anonymous accounts, all laced with threats and demands. One said I would regret ruining their family. Another said they had friends who could make sure I lost everything. Each message I forwarded straight to Officer Klein, who logged them into the growing file. Each message confirmed Jennifer's warning desperation makes people reckless. At work, the internal review continued. My supervisor, aware of the harassment, kept me updated. She told me that investigators had found no evidence of misconduct. Still, the shadow of accusation lingered, and I caught coworkers glancing at me, whispers following me down hallways. I carried myself taller, reminding myself that silence in the office was not shame, it was uncertainty. And once the truth surfaced, that silence would turn to support. Meanwhile, Noah reached out at last. One evening, my phone buzzed with his number, a call I almost ignored. His voice cracked as he spoke. Jess, I did not know it would go this far. I thought he would just pressure you not. This. I wanted to believe him, wanted to hear in his words a brother standing on my side. But I also knew fear held him tight. He still lived under their roof. He still relied on their scraps. I told him I hoped he would find the courage to step out, but until then I had to move without him. The line went quiet heavy with the weight of things unsaid. The weeks before the hearing dragged on like years. My nights were filled with restless dreams of footsteps outside my door, of contracts I had never signed, piling higher and higher, of my mother's voice, whispering that loyalty meant surrender. Yet each morning I woke and forced myself to document, to prepare, to hold firm. Jennifer's words echoed in my head. This is a pattern a jury will understand. When the court date was finally set at Arapahoe County, I felt the shift. It was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. And justice was not a private hope anymore. It was becoming a public reckoning. The courthouse in Arapahoe County stood like a fortress of brick and glass, its wide steps crowded with people carrying folders, briefcases, and the weight of their own stories. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, I walked up those steps with Jennifer at my side. My ribs still ached when I moved too quickly, but I held myself straight, refusing to let pain bend me. The sky above was sharp with winter light, the kind that makes everything appear harsher, clearer. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish. We passed through metal detectors, the clink of my keys loud against the tray. I caught sight of Rick and Darla across the lobby. He wore a suit too small at the shoulders, his jaw clenched in forced confidence. She stood close to him, her hair carefully styled, her lips painted into a line of defiance. When her eyes met mine, I searched for hesitation, for shame. There was none. Only blame, sharp and unwavering. The hearing was brief, more procedure than trial, but even in those few minutes, the tension crackled. Jennifer presented the video from Avery's body cam, the footage projected onto a screen that cast cold light across the courtroom. There it was. Rick's charge, my fall, my mother's clapping hands. A murmur rose from the gallery. The judge leaned forward, his expression tightening. Rick's attorney objected, claiming the footage was taken out of context, but Jennifer countered swiftly, reminding the court that context does not erase impact. The judge allowed the evidence to stand. When the gavel struck to adjourn, Rick glared at me as if his stare alone could undo the damage. Darla whispered furiously to him, her hands fluttering like restless birds. I felt the eyes of strangers on me as I walked out, whispers following, some pitying, some supportive, all marking me as the center of a storm that was only beginning. That evening, Jennifer called with updates. The prosecution would move forward with multiple charges: assault, fraud, attempted forgery, intimidation. She told me it was rare to have such clear evidence in cases tangled with family ties. She sounded confident, but she also reminded me the road ahead would be long. Trials twist, juries falter, pressure mounts. I thanked her, hanging onto her calm like a lifeline. At home, the retaliation continued. Anonymous letters slipped under my door, warning me that people who betray blood never sleep easy. I filed each one, my notebook growing thicker. Some nights fear crept in, whispering that maybe they were right. Maybe I would never rest. But each morning I looked at the flash drive Avery had given me and I remembered the truth: they had done this to themselves. Support arrived in unexpected ways. A neighbor I barely knew left a note taped to my door saying she had seen the news clip and that she believed me. Coworkers who once whispered in the hall now brought coffee to my desk, quiet gestures of solidarity. Even Noah sent a text late one night: "I am sorry. I do not know how to fix this." I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. I wanted to tell him he could fix it by standing up, but I typed only, "Take care of yourself." The pressure was building on every side family work court. Yet inside that pressure, I found a strange clarity. For years, I had bent under the weight of guilt, of manipulation, of secrecy. Now the weight was shifting. It was no longer mine to carry alone. The world had seen. The law was watching. And no matter how loudly Rick and Darla shouted about loyalty, no matter how many threats they scribbled onto paper, they could not silence the truth. As I closed my eyes that night, exhaustion tugging me under, I repeated Jennifer's words in my head. This is a pattern a jury will understand. For the first time, I believed it. The morning of the trial, the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Reporters lingered on the steps, their microphones ready, their eyes sharp for any glimpse of drama. Inside the marble floor reflected the harsh glow of overhead lights. Every step echoed, reminding me how far this fight had carried me from the quiet life I once built. I walked with Jennifer at my side, her calm stride, a contrast to the storm gathering inside me. The courtroom itself was colder than I expected. Long wooden benches filled quickly with strangers, curious neighbors, and parents from the league who had witnessed the game. Some nodded at me as I entered, their silent support pressing against the tension that knotted my chest. At the front, the judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through files as if this were any other case. But I knew, and everyone watching knew, that this was more than paperwork. This was family stripped bare in the harsh light of justice. Rick sat at the defense table, his suit stretched tight, his expression carved into something meant to look confident. Darla sat beside him, her face carefully painted, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. She refused to look at me, though I felt her awareness prickling every time I shifted in my seat. Noah was not with them. His absence was a silent statement, one that gave me a thread of strength. When the trial began, Jennifer rose first. She spoke with precision, her words clean and measured. She laid out the charges: assault, fraud, attempted forgery, intimidation. She reminded the jury that this was not about misunderstandings or family quarrels. It was about deliberate acts, choices made to control and harm. She spoke my name with steady respect, each syllable placing me firmly in the role of survivor, not victim. Then came the evidence. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life, and Avery's body cam footage filled the courtroom, the moment replayed in brutal clarity. Rick charging across the field, my body colliding with the post. Darla clapping, her voice slicing through the air. Gasps rose from the benches. A murmur swept through the room, sharp and horrified. I kept my eyes forward, though my chest tightened as if reliving the impact. This time, though, I was not alone. Dozens of eyes saw what I had endured. Dozens of ears heard my mother's cheer. Rick's attorney objected, claiming the footage was misleading, that it did not show what happened before or after. But Jennifer countered swiftly. "Context," she said, "does not erase cruelty." She played the video again, slower this time, each frame a nail in the coffin of denial. The jury leaned forward, their eyes fixed. Next came the forged contracts. Photographs of my falsified signature were displayed on the screen, the ink slanted just enough to betray the hand that copied it. Officer Klein testified, his calm voice explaining how each document had been collected, logged, verified. He spoke of the lock damage on my apartment, the anonymous letters, the false report to my workplace. Each piece stacked higher, a wall of proof Rick and Darla could not climb. As the hours stretched, my throat grew dry, my hands clenched tight in my lap. Yet beneath the nerves was something steadier, a growing certainty that the truth had finally broken free. No more whispered accusations, no more private manipulation. Everything was in the open now, undeniable and unshakable. When the judge called for recess, I stepped into the hallway, the buzz of voices following me. Strangers approached, offering quiet words of support, shaking their heads at the cruelty they had just witnessed. For years, I had lived in silence, doubting myself. Now the silence had shattered, replaced by the voices of others who finally saw what I had endured. When recess ended and we filed back into the courtroom, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of what had already been revealed. The jury sat straighter, their faces pale with the imprint of the footage. Rick adjusted his tie with jerky motions, the confidence he had carried into the room slipping through his fingers. Darla pressed her hands together in her lap, lips moving as if whispering to herself. Jennifer called me to the stand. My steps felt slow, deliberate as I moved to the witness chair. The oath was a blur, but the feel of the wooden seat under me was sharp, grounding. I kept my eyes on Jennifer as she began her questions. She asked about my work, my life, the history of pressure at family dinners. She asked about the calls, the accusations, the way every refusal turned into another battle. I spoke plainly, my voice steady though my ribs ached with every breath. When she asked what it felt like to hear my mother cheer after I was knocked down, the words caught in my throat. I looked toward the jury meeting, their eyes one by one. I told them that the pain of the hit faded, but the sound of my mother's hands clapping was a wound that would not close. That betrayal, I said, was louder than the impact. A hush fell over the room. Some jurors shifted their expressions, tightening with outrage. Then it was the defense's turn. Rick's attorney approached with feigned calm, his voice dripping with suggestion. He asked if I had exaggerated, if I had provoked, if perhaps the crowd misunderstood my mother's words. He tried to twist my independence into arrogance, my refusals into spite. But each attempt slid off the wall of evidence already standing tall. I answered firmly, refusing to flinch. No, I did not provoke. No, I did not exaggerate. No, I will not carry their lies anymore. Finally, Darla was called. She rose slowly, her heels clicking against the tile. For a moment, I saw the woman who had once braided my hair before school, the mother who had hummed lullabies. But the illusion cracked as she sat down and faced the jury. Her voice shook at first, then sharpened. She said she clapped to calm Rick, not to cheer. She said I had misunderstood, that I was twisting her love into cruelty. Her words faltered when Jennifer produced the bank transfer records. Documents slid onto the screen, numbers glowing in stark clarity, thousands funneled from Darla's account into Rick's shell company. The room gasped, her face drained of color. Jennifer's voice rang firm. This is not the sound of love. This is the sound of complicity. The gallery erupted in murmurs, the tide turning fully. Darla's attempt to reclaim innocence had shattered, leaving only exposure. She looked at Rick, but he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, unwilling to share her downfall. The judge's gavel struck restoring order. Closing arguments followed Jennifer weaving every piece of evidence into a single thread. She spoke of betrayal, of manipulation, of the courage it takes to say no when family demands silence. She asked the jury to look not just at what happened on the field, but at the years that led there, the pattern of coercion and fraud that culminated in public violence. Her voice rose not loud, but resolute, filling the room with truth that could no longer be buried. By the time the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the outcome felt almost inevitable. Still, my chest tightened as I waited. Minutes stretched into hours, each second a test of endurance. I thought of every dinner, every forged signature, every night spent wondering if I was wrong to resist. And then the door opened and the jury filed back in their faces solemn, their verdict ready to speak. The courtroom was silent when the jury foreperson rose, paper in hand, eyes steady, as if the weight of my entire life rested on their voice. I held my breath, my palms damp against the polished wood of the plaintiff's table. Every muscle taut with years of waiting for someone outside my family to see the truth. The foreperson cleared their throat and read guilty on assault, guilty on attempted forgery, guilty on fraud, guilty on intimidation. Each word struck like a drumbeat, final and undeniable, echoing across the room. I felt my ribs ache from the tension, breaking the sharp sting of tears pressing against my eyes. Rick's face hardened into stone, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Darla sagged beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to hold on to her composure, but the color drained from her cheeks as the reality landed. The judge's voice followed firm and resolute, announcing the sentence. Rick was to serve 12 years in prison, his crimes stacking into a timeline that stretched across the next decade of his life. Darla received 3 years, the court recognizing her role in conspiracy and intimidation, her complicity laid bare for all to see. The gallery shifted whispers, rising some, gasping at the severity, others nodding with grim approval. I looked at the jurors, ordinary men and women who had carried my story for days, and I saw in their eyes not pity, but recognition. They had seen the footage, heard the cheers, read the documents. They understood. My knees trembled with the release of a burden I had carried since childhood. When the gavel struck to close the session, a wave of sound rushed back into the room. Reporters scurried toward the door pins, scratching voices sharp with urgency. Parents from the league reached out to me, their words tangled with sympathy and outrage. Even strangers approached, their voices low, telling me I had shown strength they wished they had found in their own battles. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to anchor myself in the present, to believe that it was real, that this time the truth had not been twisted, that this time my voice had been heard and believed. As deputies led Rick and Darla out in handcuffs, Darla's eyes finally met mine. For the briefest second, I saw something flicker there, a crack in her armor. Not remorse, but a recognition that her power over me was gone. Rick did not look at me at all. His stare fixed forward, pride still clinging to him like a mask he refused to remove, even as chains rattled at his wrists. When they disappeared through the side door, I exhaled fully, a breath I had been holding for decades. When the courtroom emptied and the heavy doors closed behind the last juror, I finally felt the exhaustion seep into my bones, not just from the trial, but from years of standing alone against a tide of family pressure and denial. Outside the courthouse, the Colorado air was cool, a faint breeze carrying the scent of pine from the foothills, and I stood on the granite steps staring at the horizon as if searching for a sign that life could truly begin again. Reporters clustered near the sidewalk microphones thrust forward, their voices cutting through the murmur of the crowd. But I kept walking, ignoring the questions about betrayal, about forgiveness, about what it meant to watch my own mother sentenced. Noah was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his shoulders slouched but his eyes brighter than I had seen in years. He hugged me tight, whispering that he was proud that Dad would be proud too, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. The fallout was immediate. Blue Quarry Systems issued a statement of support, my colleagues sending messages that they admired my courage and resilience. My apartment complex upgraded my locks and waived fees to make sure I felt secure. The soccer league suspended Rick permanently and circulated the referee footage as a training tool, a reminder that cameras protect more than just games. But beneath the surface victories lay the ache of finality. My mother's absence did not feel like relief at first, but like an open wound, raw and stinging. Every memory of her laughter of childhood afternoons spent baking cookies or brushing my hair before school clashed violently with the image of her clapping as Rick slammed me into a metal post. At night, I lay awake, the sound of her rings clicking together as she applauded, replaying in my head like a cruel soundtrack. Friends told me to cut her off, to treat her like any other criminal, and part of me wanted to, but another part grieved for the mother I thought I once had, even if she had never really existed. Slowly, the support of others began to drown out the echo of betrayal. My soccer team organized a fundraiser for victims of financial fraud, raising thousands of dollars in my name. Avery, the referee whose calm voice had steadied me on the field, checked in regularly, reminding me that justice had been documented, that truth had triumphed. Jennifer Reeves, my attorney, became more than legal counsel. She became a confidant, urging me to rebuild without guilt, reminding me that surviving toxic family is not betrayal, but survival. Noah moved out of Darla's house and into a small apartment near the community college, working nights and studying during the day. He told me he wanted to become a teacher, someone who could guide young people without manipulation or violence. Watching him grow into independence gave me hope that the cycle of dysfunction had finally cracked. I relocated to Denver's low-high neighborhood into a modest loft with tall windows that flooded the rooms with light. Each morning, I walked to work with a steadiness I had not felt in years, knowing no one could force my hand or forge my name again. On weekends, I still laced up my cleats, stepping onto the green fields of Aurora, not as a victim, but as a survivor, reclaiming her ground. Standing in the goal box one Saturday morning, sun on my face, teammates laughing around me, I realized the field no longer carried the weight of betrayal, but the promise of renewal. My mother and stepfather had chosen fraud and violence. I had chosen truth and resilience, and that choice had set me free. The days after the sentencing unfolded like waking from a long fever. For years, I had lived in a constant state of vigilance, waiting for the next phone call demanding my signature, the next dinner, where my refusal would be painted as betrayal, the next scheme Rick concocted with my mother's approval. Suddenly, the silence was almost disorienting. There were no late-night knocks on my apartment door, no anonymous loan applications flagged with my name, no whispered guilt trips about loyalty. At first, I did not know what to do with the absence. I found myself checking my phone compulsively, half expecting to see Darla's name light up the screen with another accusation. Instead, there were messages from friends, colleagues, even strangers who had read about the case. Some shared their own stories of parents who chose partners over children of siblings who stole of families that demanded compliance at the cost of self. Their voices formed a chorus of solidarity, reminding me that though my story was uniquely mine, the pain of toxic family was a language many understood. Work became a steady anchor. Returning to Blue Quarry Systems, I immersed myself in compliance reports and fraud investigations with a clarity sharpened by personal experience. Each irregularity I flagged, each pattern I uncovered felt like a small victory, not only for my employer, but for myself. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon, praising my precision and resilience, and hinted at a promotion. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider a future not haunted by fear, but built on my own merit. At home, I began to craft new routines. In my loft apartment, I painted one wall a deep blue, a color of calm and strength, and lined shelves with evidence binders now closed and archived. Instead of documents proving betrayal, I filled new folders with plans for travel, for continuing education, for a life of my choosing. On weekends, the soccer field remained my sanctuary. Standing once again in Aurora Sports Complex, I looked at the corner flag post where everything had collapsed and felt the strange comfort of closure. The scar tissue in my ribs still ached when the weather shifted, and my wrist stiffened after long hours of typing, but the physical reminders became proof of survival rather than weakness. The league invited me to speak at a safety meeting where I told referees and players about the power of cameras, about the importance of community, and about the courage of documenting, even when family says silence. Faces nodded around the room, eyes widened in recognition, and I realized my pain had become not just a burden, but a tool for others. Yet beneath the victories, there was still grief. In quiet moments, I thought of my mother not as the woman who clapped when I was attacked, but as the mother who once braided my hair for school recitals. Reconciling the two was impossible, so I stopped trying. Instead, I allowed myself to grieve the mother I never truly had, and to accept that choosing distance was not cruelty, but necessity. Noah visited often, bringing stories of classes and new friends, and together we began to build a sibling bond separate from the ruins of our upbringing. One evening, he told me he had applied for a transfer to a university in Boulder, determined to carve his own path. I hugged him tightly, knowing that breaking free is not just an act, but a choice repeated every day. In those moments, I saw the beginning of a family not defined by blood, but by trust. Months passed, and the story that had once consumed every headline faded into the background noise of new scandals and fresh tragedies. But for me, the echoes remained sharp, shaping every decision I made in the quiet rebuilding of my life. The first Christmas without my mother felt hollow, the absence louder than any carol yet. When friends invited me to their family gatherings, I felt a warmth I had never known at home, a kindness offered without conditions or manipulation. Slowly, I came to understand that family is not always the people who share your blood, but the ones who share your burdens, and that realization shifted the ground beneath my feet. Therapy sessions helped me untangle years of guilt, teaching me that my refusal to sign away my future was not selfishness, but self-preservation. I learned to breathe without apology, to walk into rooms without shrinking, to speak without fear that loyalty would be questioned. Some nights the old nightmares returned, Darla's applause ringing in my ears, Rick's shadow charging across the field, but instead of waking in panic, I rose and wrote, pouring my memories onto paper until the terror lost its grip. What began as scribbled notes became essays, and what began as essays grew into the outline of a book, a story about survival, betrayal, and the power of saying no. A publisher in Denver expressed interest, and for the first time I imagined my pain transformed into something that might guide others. Noah thrived in Boulder, his grades strong, his voice lighter each time he called. He spoke about coaching youth soccer, about helping kids channel anger into discipline, and I saw in him the seed of a man who would break the cycle entirely. On weekends, he sometimes joined me at the Aurora fields, where we laughed like siblings who had finally been allowed to grow without chains. Avery, the referee who had once clicked on a body cam and altered the course of my life, became a quiet friend stopping by games, checking in with a nod or a smile. His simple act of pressing record reminded me that sometimes justice begins not in courtrooms, but in small choices made in ordinary moments. The world had moved on from my case, but my own aftermath was not about headlines. It was about waking each morning in my loft with sunlight spilling through tall windows, knowing the locks were strong, the debts erased, the voices of coercion silenced by walls I had chosen. It was about walking into blue quarry systems with my head high, trusted again, not because I had defended myself, but because the truth had spoken louder than lies. It was about knowing that though my mother sat behind prison walls, her choices no longer defined me. I was no longer the daughter trapped between loyalty and survival. I was Jessica Malone, 32, survivor professional sister teammate, a woman who had stood on the sidelines of a soccer field and refused to fall quietly. The aftermath was not easy, but it was mine, and for the first time, that was enough. Looking back now, months after the verdict, and years after the first time Rick tried to slide a loan contract across the dinner table, I realized that survival is not a single moment, but 1,000 small choices strung together like beads on a fragile thread. It was the choice to refuse when it would have been easier to surrender, the choice to stand up even after being knocked into the turf, the choice to walk into a courtroom with ribs still aching and speak the truth out loud. Each choice was terrifying. Each one carried a cost, but together they wove a path out of the shadows and into something that resembled freedom. I used to believe that loyalty meant silence, that love meant obedience, that family meant sacrifice even when it hollowed you out from the inside. But now I understand that loyalty without respect is manipulation, love without safety is control, and family without trust is just another prison. The field where I fell has grown into a symbol not of pain, but of revelation. I return there sometimes standing near the same corner post, the grass whispering in the wind, and I remind myself that justice does not always arrive in grand speeches or sweeping gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the steady hand of a referee, pressing record in the voices of strangers refusing to look away, in the courage of a jury willing to say guilty. My mother's applause will echo in my mind for the rest of my life, but it no longer holds the same power. Once it was a wound proof that the person who should have protected me chose betrayal instead. Now it is a reminder of what I have overcome. A sound I survived, a sound that cannot define me. Rick sits behind bars, Darla serves her sentence, and for once, their choices are their burden to carry, not mine. I walk freely through my days, not without scars, but with a sense of ownership over my life that I never thought possible. The truth is messy, it leaves marks, it demands strength you do not know you have until you are forced to find it. But the truth also heals, it builds communities of survivors, it transforms silence into solidarity. Every time someone stops me in a grocery store or emails me after reading about the case to say they finally feel less alone, I know the cost was not wasted. I know that speaking out was worth it. I know that justice, however imperfect, has meaning. And so I share my story not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever been told to keep quiet, to sign away their future, to clap along with cruelty, because that is what family demands. You do not owe your silence. You do not owe your suffering. You owe yourself freedom, and freedom begins with the choice to say no. If you are watching this, if you have lived through a toxic family or stood alone against voices that tried to silence you, know that your story matters too. Know that you are not wrong to want safety, to want dignity, to want peace. My name is Jessica Malone, and I survived betrayal on the sidelines of a soccer field. I survived the applause of my own mother. I survived the weight of years of coercion, and I found my way back to myself. And if you are still standing, then you can too. If you have ever faced the moment when the people who should protect you turn against you, if you have ever carried the loneliness of being doubted, if you have ever wondered whether justice could possibly reach into the ordinary corners of your life, let this story be your reminder that it can. The referee's whistle blew, and for once, justice answered. And now, I ask you if you have ever lived through a toxic family, if you have ever been forced to choose between silence and survival, share your story in the comments below. Let someone else see your courage. Let someone else know they are not alone. And if you are here simply listening, drop your city or your state so I know where you are watching from, so I know how far these stories reach. Because every like, every comment, every voice added to this conversation becomes another beam of light cutting through the darkness of silence. And sometimes that light is what keeps someone alive long enough to make their own choice, to take their own step to reclaim their own freedom.